You're listening to the Knuckledraggerzzz Extravaganza, and if have been a fan of the show for any period of time, it'll be pretty special to know that I'm joined here today by none other than Mr. Devin Townsend himself. Devin, it's great to have you here.
It's a pleasure to be here, man.
So, you've spoken before about your love of The Dark Crystal, and something like 70% of that film being left on the cutting room floor. How
Yeah.
much of a Devin Townsend record do we normally not hear?
Well, I would say the ratio is similar. I would say 70%, but a lot of that doesn't even get actualized as music. A lot of that is the effort that goes into trying to determine what the music is meant to be. So by that, I mean I'll experiment with different avenues, whether or not it's theoretically or technically or with gear or with personnel. And and because my peripheral vision is so limited, I don't know until I've experienced it what works or what doesn't. So much of the process gets left behind that rarely gets talked about or seen for sure.
Do you ever go back to any of those other tiny little blips and bloops of ideas and try them again, or do you just sort of,
I do,
file them
but
away?
the problem with it in general is that each one of these periods of time that yield an album requires the circumstances around that period in order for me to understand the music, right? So past its gestation period, past the best before date, the music doesn't seem to make sense to me anymore. So I'll have these ideas of things that I thought was like a spark of idea or a spark of inspiration, but if it doesn't find its footing during the period in which it comes out, it usually gets left behind.
Cool. I do remember you describing at some point, I think during your podcast series, every album is almost like a thesis on something you're trying to figure out at each part of your life.
Yeah, yeah,
So I
and
guess like,
unintentionally so.
cool.
Sorry.
Oh no, no, yeah, that's pretty much what I wanted to hear. So, but
Yeah, no.
speaking of ideas that are, I don't know, filed away or not currently seen, The Moth.
Yeah.
This is a project I've been really curious about for a really long time. You've talked about it potentially being like a huge stage production, being hindered by, let me check my notes, a shitload of money. Uh,
Yeah.
where is the moth right now? What form do you see it taking shape in?
Every day it migrates conceptually. And I'm in the process right now of trying to allow the past couple of years of my development, which has included like a whole lot of change, whether I was moving or renovating or building a studio or parents getting older or friends passing away or, you know, wife in menopause, kid leaving home, whatever it is, there's been such a huge amount of change that's gone on that I'm waiting for all these pennies to drop so that those experiences can coagulate into an identity that I can then really be clear about. And until such time, um, it just morphs every day. One day it's this abstract thing, and the other day it's a very linear thing, and then the next day it's a musical, and the next day it's an experimental loop-based thing. And one day it's a film, so and it's not because I struggle to make my mind up. It's literally because until the the emotional experiences that I've been through have taken root and have processed internally, it's all an abstraction. So I just have to keep writing and I just have to keep organizing and getting my life in some degree of order. And then by proxy, the ideas start to appear and they're undeniable at that point. You're like, well, of course it's that. Of course it's that. But until such time, man, really it's just I'm just grasping at straws. I wish I was more aware of myself in the moment, but it seems like I have to be deep into the mire of it before I'm able to recognize that I'm even in it. Yeah, man, that doesn't make any
Mhm.
sense, but I hope it makes some sense.
I think a little bit, yeah. I'll
Okay.
rewatch it and I'll be like, oh, of course.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that'd be one of us.
I'll let you know when I figure it
Okay,
out.
thanks, man. Yeah.
But from what you've described, it seems like a really full-on project. Even when you were here for your acoustic tour a couple of years ago, I think 2019,
Yeah.
like you were describing it then, and it sounded incredibly intense, versus something like light work, for example, which not that it doesn't have intensities, but there's no guys killing each other with their dicks.
No, no. Well, I mean, maybe on some level there are. Maybe some level that's all there is, right? But I uh I think that the intensity of the moth is because on some level I think what has started to appear conceptually is it's a story that acts as a metaphor for a protagonist's life from his birth to his death. But clearly, as somebody who's writing, it's based on my own experience, and so to get the story right is hand in hand with sort of figuring out my own trip in a way. And I think up to this point, all the records have had that as a component, but never has it been as overt as this. And so I think that there's something, like you say, intense just about the recognition of that, just about the recognition that it's like, oh, this is a story about your life, or this is a story about life in general. And so I think where I'm at with it conceptually now is just sort of struggling with the incredible pretentiousness of it. And and I'll go back and forth between like, oh, this is so fucking stupid. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing? To, oh yeah, well, it makes perfect sense. Why wouldn't I do that? And then on the process and on the path of doing that, I tend to veer off in all these other different directions musically. Like I'll do this chaos stuff, and then I'll do this linear stuff, and then I'll do this loop-based abstract stuff, and it just seems to be slowly plodding along. And every now and then when I hit a mark with it, then I start to include other people. So now I've got orchestrators and choral directors and an orchestra in the Netherlands, and so as per usual, it seems like the confusion of me is just an omnipresent, constantly exploding bomb. But while that's exploding, it just kind of shit gets done. so so I'm constantly exploding and in some sort of weird existential dilemma, yet it all just keeps moving along, and
It's
I'm
a very
happy.
productive explosion.
It's arguably not the healthiest one, but I think a big part of the concept of the moth is you have to make peace with what it is that you are. And I think your intrinsic nature is you can modify certain aspects of your personality, I think, and how you react to things specifically. But I think your intrinsic nature is a hard thing to make huge adjustments to. And a big part of my intrinsic nature is I'm just, I got a lot of anxiety, and I'm neurotic, right? So it's like, so you got to use your delusion in a sense, and so that's what I do.
I mean, it's pretty important to be aware of that delusion,
Very much.
especially if you have, the balls to call yourself an artist.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. But I guess it also would depend on what the definition of an artist would be.
Do you think there's any part of being an artist that isn't extremely pretentious?
No, I think it's just by nature extremely pretentious, because I think that the nature of being an artist on some fundamental level is a need for people to participate in the work, which implies a type of uh, need for validation that is fundamentally flawed, I think. But again, you can intellectualize that, but I also have to recognize that I love doing it so much that when I try to stop doing it, I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, I'm just not going to make art. I'm not going to create. And then I I come away from it, and then all of a sudden I'm like, well, what am I going to do now? Like, that's what I do. That's my whole thing, man. I fucking love it. So making peace with the fact that you're full of shit, I think, is a first step. And then to answer your question, with a lot of words, yeah, I think just it's you're full of shit as an artist if you call yourself one just straight out of the gate. And making peace with being full of shit is a great step.
I remember when I first heard you talking about this whole trip of like being an artist just being that so incredibly pretentious, it made me stop and look at myself. And I was, booking shows for an original act, and then I realized like, oh my God, I'm inviting everyone I know to go to a room and look at me.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
sort of fucked up, isn't
Well,
it?
it is, but I also feel that there's another side of it, and that is if you have the capacity through whatever means that you've managed to achieve that, to do things that help other people, you know, whether or not it's lyrically or performance or even through catharsis of seeing somebody rend themselves or just to be able to have the talent, I guess, to be able to express things that other people aren't comfortable with, then it's worth the effort in a sense because life is short and I would prefer to do something that's of help to other people than just to make other people's lives worse. So I think you can go down the rabbit hole of calling yourself out for being pretentious and full of shit and all this, which is true. But at the same time, it's best to also consider that you're you are providing a service on some level. And I think that's a worthy use of time. So the
It's a healthy way of
juxtaposition
thinking
is a
about it.
little, yeah, I think it's worth thinking about it because I think if you're self-deprecating by nature, you can really kneecap yourself into thinking that everything you do is stupid. But if people do like it, and if you're able to express something that does help other people, I mean, I think it's a worthy use of your time. So balancing that is the trick, that juxtaposition, right?
Mm. With your writing process being so based on listening, and I think you've described it as the music is like already there, and we're just conduits finding it. Do you find it hard with that process to commit to like a message or a story in the case of the moth, or does it sort of naturally flow out of the music that is already there?
I think I used to be more sketched out by it than I am now because I didn't feel like in the past I had any control over it. But now I recognize that much of the narrative occurs based on your day-to-day activities. So, for example, when I tour and much of my life, I abstain from certain things, right? Whether or not that's across the board or just here and there. Take meat, for example. And people in my family say, well, you don't eat meat. And I'm like, well, sometimes I do. Like if somebody I care about makes me something that they've put love into, of course I'll eat it.
Like
But
a double cheeseburger.
well, I don't know. It has to be a triple for me to really get behind it. But
Triple,
the
wow.
point, yeah, man, fuck man, I don't fuck around. But but I think the point of it is little bits of discipline, even as innocuous as it may seem, it's just like what you eat or exercise or anything allows you to sort of massage the narrative of your life in a weird way, where the cause and effect of it is just, it's not esoteric, it's just what it is. And so if you choose to do things that result in something that, it's a defined outcome, you can kind of guide what you're hearing in a weird way because you're just kind of following these pathways.
So the disciplines you choose massage the narrative of your own life.
I believe so.
I'm holding on to that one. That's really good.
Yeah. Yeah, I believe so, man. I really do. And I think it's everything. What's the thing? Everything is permissible, right? Like it's not like, there's some big sky daddy telling you that you shouldn't or you should be doing something. But I think that the idea of cause and effect gets mired with the concept of karma. And because it's almost like it's got such an esoteric ring to the idea of karma that people think of it as being something that is just, woo woo juice. But if you think of it in terms of cause and effect instead, it makes a lot of sense. So it's like, yeah, you can eat whatever you want at any time, but you know what this does to you. You know what this does to you. You know what this does to you, typically. So you make the choice and have to deal with the ramifications of it. It doesn't mean that the choice is right or wrong. It's just, are you willing to swallow that guilt or deal with that discomfort, or, you know, postpone reward for the sake of, short-term pain, whatever it is. And I think that those decisions that you make go hand in hand with understanding your own frame of mind from moment to moment. And by doing so, the things that you're privy to artistically, I think, go hand in hand with that. And it shifts as your internal dialogue shifts. So although the music, when I say it exists, again, I don't mean that in an esoteric way. It's almost just like when you follow the path of least resistance for any particular part of your trip, um, things will seem obvious as a result of being where you are. And I think that includes intervals and musical aesthetic, whether or not it's like sonically or conceptually. I think it follows suit. So your work then is less about trying to discover melodies and discover songs, but more so figure out where you're at. Not even figure out where you're at, because I think that's also there's a pitfall there as well. But just be okay with where you're at, and in whichever guise that takes. I find that in
Wow.
the past I would beat myself up so much about certain things that I would think or certain things that I would do, and and I think there's also in that lies problems as well. It's like, no, you do your best, but then you have to be okay with the character that you are, right? And that's a big step, because it turns the act of creating into that of self-care, because you're articulating your frame of mind as it progresses. And I think that's very helpful. Maybe not to everybody, but to me.
I could certainly relate to that.
Hmm.
Before we wrap up here, one last thing I want to ask you. Uh, while we all have lots of bands who influence us, still we all rip off Meshuggah. Truer words were never spoken.
Truly.
You've mentioned your love of new age stuff like Enya and Emerald Web, and even one of the main riffs in Earth Day being born out of learning an Emerald Web melody.
Yeah.
Who are you ripping off that you wish more people would also rip off, or at least knew about?
Soviet France.
Soviet France.
Yeah.
Never heard that name.
Yeah, they're from Newcastle, and it's just I just love it. It's just the foundation of so much of what I do comes from that kind of experimental loop-based music. It's all sort of dark, and it acts more like a soundtrack, like a soundtrack to your day, rather
Right.
than putting on songs, right? And I think since a very young age, I became fascinated by the idea of that, Rapun, Soviet France, uh, things that were based on finding interesting repeating sounds and letting them morph over time. And I think that what that taught me, for lack of a better phrase, is that there's a musical narrative in any sound. It doesn't
Ooh, I like
necessarily have
that.
to be, yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to the structures that we're force fed. And so much of my attempts to understand the structures that make sense to society in general, like you start with the chorus and you go to the verse and the pre-chorus, chorus, verse two, pre-chorus, chorus, bridge, double chorus, end, like
Mm.
that kind of thing. I mean, there's value in that too, because it's familiar and I like it. But the experimental stuff that I really love still to this day, it's like there's a story that unfolds just from the movement of these sonic tapestries, and that I found really inspiring, because you can manipulate the emotional responses, not only of an audience but of yourself, based on things that you wouldn't think of. I was out with a friend today. Actually, we went to a place and
I might actually have to cut us off there because you've got another
okay.
interview in about 1 minute, I
Oh,
think.
you bet it. Have a great one. Thank you for the
You as
opportunity,
well.
man, and I'll
Thank
talk
you,
to you
Devin.
soon. You bet.
Thank you. Appreciate it. See you, man.
Bye bye.